Thank you. Our next speaker is Orlean Koehle. And Orlean is the California president, or the president of the California branch of the Eagle Forum. She's a prolific writer. She would carry a number of her books, including the one on smart meters and on the one she just put together on this new educational program. And basically, the mind of our youth is so vitally important. And the people who would enslave us certainly are fighting a battle to control the minds of our youth. And there is a new educational program out, federal in origin, which most people have never heard of. Orlean has done some wonderful work on it, and I asked her specifically to come and tell you. Because if you don't understand what's going on, you can't understand how this situation is developing and the real danger to our children. So with that as a background, Orlean Koehle, thank you so much.
Well, it's a real pleasure to be here, and I am the concluding speaker, so I would just like to tell Dr. Stan what a wonderful job he's done putting this marvelous conference together. It's been wonderful to hear the speakers who have gone before me and all the amazing things that I have learned from them, and I'm sure you have as well. I would like to start off by telling you a little story. When Obama was running for office in 2008, he was speaking to a large group, something like this, and he told them, "When I am elected your president, I promise you that you won't have to worry anymore about your mortgage payments." And of course everyone clapped. And he said, "I promise you that you won't even have to worry about your car payments," and everyone clapped. "And I promise you that I will give you free health care." Of course everyone clapped. And he said, "And I promise you, every one of you will have a job." Nobody clapped. And one man's hand went up and he said, "Why would we need a job?" And that's what socialism does for people. It takes away their incentive to work. It takes away their incentive to improve their lives and to be willing to share with others as well. And that's the state of our union that we now have. I am going to tell you today about something that is just as dangerous and bad as all of the other socialist programs that he has put through. As you know, he's had such success. He took over the mortgage companies. He took over the banks. We have a takeover of our auto industry. We have takeover of our student loans. And of course, the big one was the takeover of the health care. According to Michelle Bachmann, our government has now achieved 60% takeover of our nation, promoting socialism. Well, quietly, behind the scenes, Obama did this amazing other thing, which is just as bad as Obamacare. It's Obama Ed. And I'm going to tell you about this and how sneakily he was able to put this through. I was in Utah for a month this summer, in the month of July, in Heber City, Utah. It's up near Park City, just a little farther, where some amazing people had taken on this battle called Common Core State Standards Initiative. That's how I learned about it. And I was so stunned. Here I am, a former teacher. I did not know a thing about it. How many of you have ever heard of Common Core education? There's just a tiny little handful of you, and this is how it is throughout our nation. I would say that maybe 90% of our nation has never heard of this, and I'm going to tell you the reasons why. And then I'm going to tell you how far this has gone and how it really does have a great deal to do with how they're promoting Agenda 21 throughout the world and a global education throughout the world. It's not just Obamacare or Obama Ed. It's something that behind the scenes they are promoting everywhere. So, I wrote a book. When I can't figure out what is happening, I research. So this was my little book that was written in the past 2.5 months, and it's called Common Core, A Trojan Horse for Education Reform. Why do I call it a Trojan horse? Because it pretends to be an innocent state initiative, but it is a Trojan horse, a national top-down socialized education system in disguise. Does everyone here understand what is meant by a Trojan horse? You ask our kids in the public schools what that is, nobody knows anymore because they're not being taught Greek mythology, they're not being taught classical literature anymore, and when Common Core goes totally into effect, classical literature will be lowered from 80% down to 50%. And it is really lowering the standards, but they're pretending that it is making the standards more robust, more higher standards for our youth, and that is not the case. So essentially, in the beginning of my book, I explain the whole Trojan core symbol, and as you know, back in ancient Greece, they were having a 10-year-long battle between the Greeks and the Trojans, and it was over a beautiful lady named Helen of Troy who had been kidnapped by the Trojans from her husband, and she now was living with the Prince of Troy in their kingdom, and the Greeks came to get her back. And this long battle went on for 10 years, and because the city of Troy was surrounded by a huge wall, the Greeks could not really do anything to conquer this city. So they finally decided to do it by deception. They left this amazing Trojan horse as pretending that it was a gift from the gods, and then they sailed away into the sunset. And the Trojans, so tired of this battle, thinking that the gods had smiled upon them, brought the Trojan horse in, thinking it was a gift from their gods. And all night long, they frolicked and had a wonderful time celebrating the end of the long Trojan War. Well, the boats that they saw sail away while they were having their celebration slowly came back. And when everyone was asleep, most of them a little bit drunk and intoxicated, the Trojan horse opened up, and here were hundreds of Trojan or Greek men inside, and they came through and pillaged and plundered and wiped out the Trojans, took Helen of Troy back, and that is how the Trojan War ended. So that is why the Trojan horse has become a symbol of deception, pretending to be something innocent and wonderful when actually it is very harmful and bad for us. That's why I entitled my book as I did. So this is the logo for Common Core State Standards Initiative. As you see, the golden-colored states are the few that have decided not to join this. And the beautiful golden enlightened ones are all given a gold color, but those darker ones are those poor little states that are still holding out. They are Alaska, Texas, Virginia, Nebraska, and part of Minnesota because they did accept the math part but not the English part. And some of these states are very courageous in holding out, and you'll see some quotes from them later why they refuse to go along with this. So how were they able to achieve this? Obama was able to keep Common Core so quiet because he already had the stimulus money. He didn't have to go to Congress and say, I have this wonderful new plan for education. I just need you to fund it and need you to pass it. He already had the stimulus money. So he went to the governors and told them, I understand you're all so strapped for funding. If you will apply for this competition to receive $4.35 billion that we have set aside for funding for education, then your state might be willing or able to win this competition. And since it was on a competition basis, the governors thought it was kind of a badge of honor. And he also made sure that there was just a 2-month window of opportunity that they had to make up their mind and go along with this. And it was during the time that most of the state legislators were not in session. And so they couldn't really go to their state legislators to ask their approval. So they mainly just went to their state school boards. And most of those school board members were already very concerned about the financial problems that their state was having. And of course, he told them what wonderful high standards this would be, and it would be a wonderful program, never letting them know they would have such costs themselves, and they thought they could compete and win this money and solve their problems. He also did it by granting them a possible waiver and also a threat. So the waiver was that if they would happily sign on to Common Core, they would be able to get a waiver from the rigid requirements of this other bill that George Bush had put through, No Child Left Behind. And the requirements were so rigid, and most of the states could not possibly ever achieve them. There's no way that you can have no child left behind, just as there's no way you can have a total race to the top, like Obama's other plan was called. So most of the governors gladly said, yes, we'd love to get this waiver to get out of No Child Left Behind. He also had a threat for those states that were not willing to sign on, that he would take away their Title I money. And for those of you who don't know what Title I money is, this is a large federal pot of money, $14.5 billion, that is divided up among the states, that goes to their special needs children. And all of the states require this or rely on this money. So this was a real threat to them. So this was another reason why 46 states signed on to this in that 2-month window of opportunity. And he even had something else. I call it race to the trough. And for those states that had refused, like Texas, he could entice the school districts just on their own. So they would be able to the school district itself, apply for this grant money, and they would be then eligible for a part of this money. So as of September last month, 2012, 893 school districts have applied for the Race to the Top money, which only maybe 15 to 20 school districts will actually win, also on this competition basis. Some of the districts are in states that had refused this, like Texas, Virginia, Alaska, but the silly districts have done this all on their own. And it is kind of what this whole thing is, a race to the trough. And there is enormous cost to the states that we now find out is happening. So the overall cost to the states will be $16 billion across the nation. California, which did not win the federal grant, we're told we now have $1.6 billion we have to come up with ourselves to implement this. Why is it so expensive? Because there's all this new computer technology and training and e-books that go along with this. Our children are all going to be learning on computers. The teachers are going to essentially become facilitators. And of course this costs a great huge of money to bring in all these computers and the e-books. And then the assessment system is coming in 2014. That'll be another $350 million to bring in this new testing system. Again, all done by computers. And Washington State will have to spend around $600 million, and I'm not sure how many other millions all the other states will have to spend, but it's much more than they ever thought. And they were not told about this either. So why is national top-down education so bad? Well, first of all, this is something our founding fathers never wanted for our country. Our founding fathers knew that education was to be left to parents and to local control. So they did not put it into the Constitution whatsoever. Anything that is not written in the Constitution is to be left to the states. So this is to be a state initiative. It's supposed to be left to the states. And to make sure, they even have 3 laws against it, 3 federal laws saying essentially that the Federal Department of Education shall not be involved in developing, supervising, or controlling instructional materials or curriculum. That's why Obama had to disguise this as a state initiative. And he thought maybe just by adding that title to it, so it's called Common Core State Standards Initiative, but the states really had nothing to do with the writing of the curriculum or with its implementation, and it was not their idea. And this is another reason why this is so bad and harmful. This was a quote by Bill Evers, a research fellow of the Hoover Institute at Stanford University. He was one of 4 experts that was invited to Utah while I was there the month of July to talk about why Common Core was so harmful. And this was his quote: "The insight of competitive federalism is that the 51 states," he didn't know that he didn't mean 58 like Obama says. It was 50 states plus the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C. And of course, they have their own state, their own school board. So the insight of competitive federalism is that the 51 state school boards are better than a single federal executive branch office, and 15,000 local school boards are better than either 51 state school boards or a single federal office. So in other words, our founding fathers knew that local small government was what they wanted for our country. And when you have local school boards that parents can have a word to say there and have some kind of influence for, then you have much better schools. But if you now have top-down national control, where do parents go if they have a complaint of what is going on in their schools? And the other very interesting thing about this Common Core education, Obama, all on his own, one of his executive orders, one of them was by executive order, a stroke of the pen, he changed FERPA. And for those who don't know, FERPA is the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act that is to protect the children so that you don't have all this data collection going on. Well, with the stroke of the pen, Obama changed that. So now our children have excessive data collection. This includes biometrics, fingerprinting, eye scanning, who knows what else, health records, personal data such as their religion and their political persuasion. And it's not only for the students, but also for the teachers. And this is how this lady, her name is Donna Garner, she's a Texas educator and blogger. She designed this formula to show how top-down education works. So you have national standards that equal national assessments that go on to national curriculum. Teachers' salaries are tied to the students' test scores. Teachers teaching to the test each and every day. National indoctrination of our public school children, and national database of students and teachers. Isn't this scary sounding? And then, because my husband is from Germany, and we lived in Germany for 3 years, and I was able to visit the Dachau concentration camp while we were there, and I learned so much of what Germany was like under Hitler, I thought I would do this little comparison. So, similarities between Nazi Germany and his education program and what's going on with Common Core. There was a very powerful teacher union created by Hitler. We have 2 very powerful teacher unions that are totally promoting Common Core. The NEA, National Education Association, and the FDA, the Federal Teachers Association. The teachers who do not like this program were weeded out under Nazi Germany, and the same thing is happening for teachers now. If they're not willing to go along with this, they're losing their jobs. And the curriculum was rewritten so that it reflected more on the ideology of Hitler. History was rewritten, and there was an anti-intellectual teaching. The children were told, you don't have to be so brilliant, you need to be robust and strong. So there was always a physical education part of this every day, and it was almost an insult to have someone very intellectual in the classroom. Then they had this amazing program called Master Teachers, where teachers were no longer under the districts or provinces in Germany receiving their salaries. They were directly under Hitler, and they received salaries from him, and they were now the spies that were going to go into all of the schools and pretending to train the teachers, really spying on them to make sure they were doing everything they were supposed to be doing. Obama has the same program. He has proudly declared he's going to have 10,000 master teachers that will be directly under him. They will be getting salaries from the federal government, and they're supposed to go into the schools and train the teachers, but we know what they will really be doing. And then they had amazing data collected on the students and the teachers, and the Hitler's youth were trained to be the spies also to report on their teachers if they were not doing exactly what they should be doing. And they were also spying on each other as children. And there was the famous statement, children belong to the state. In Latin, it's parens patria, which essentially means that the state is now the parent. And this was the most amazing magazine that came out in, I think it was 1932. And it says in German, German youth belong to the Führer. Does anyone not know what Führer meant? That was the leader, the supreme leader. That was Hitler. And there is this happy little Aryan boy with blonde hair, blue eyes, exactly all the kind they were trying to produce. And proudly, this is what is at the top of the magazine. This was a woman's magazine, and inside it tells the women all the wonderful things about Hitler's education program. So that is one scary thing that I wanted to point out, the similarities that are coming. All right, how are these standards? We're told that they're more robust, that they will make it so that all the states are on the same level, so that if someone moves from California to Utah, they won't miss a beat. All the books will be the same standards. Well, we've never really liked that. Competition is kind of the way of life for America. And if you have one district that's doing better than another, then that competition helps the other one to improve. Well, now everyone is going to be lowered to the same common core. And the standards are not robust. In math, where they have tried this, and in Utah and Massachusetts, they discovered the standards had gone down. And the most amazing thing is that algebra is not going to be taught in the 8th grade anymore. It's being moved to the 9th grade, causing it so that when you're in high school, there will not be a year that you'll even have calculus. How do you go on to compete with other students going to top universities without calculus? Well, all the universities are eventually going to be dumbed down, and I'll have a quote for you on that as well. There's also very little memorization of math, and the geometry axioms that the kids used to have to memorize aren't there anymore. And a form of geometry that was thrown out in the Soviet Union is now being taught as our new geometry. Isn't that amazing? And then, as I mentioned, English language, 80% classical literature is being dropped to 50%. Why is that so bad? Well, having been an English major in college, I think there's wonderful, great truths that you learn from English literature. You learn, well, for example, the story of the Trojan horse. You learn about deception. You learn about choosing between right and wrong. And you learn the truth, that there truly is a truth, and it's not this truth that is always changing as our children are being taught. And they learn how to make wise decisions. They value liberty as, as they are taught classical literature. They won't even know what liberty is anymore if this plan goes in. And this is a quote by Anthony Esselin. He's the professor of Renaissance and English literature and also Western civilization at Providence College in Rhode Island. And he says, what appalls me the most about the Common Core standards is the cavalier contempt for great works of human art, thought, and literacy form. We are not programming machines. We are teaching children. We are not producing functionaries, factory-like. We are to be forming the minds and hearts of men and women. Frankly, I do not wish to be governed by people whose minds and hearts have been stunted by a strictly utilitarian miseducation. And that's what this is turning into, a miseducation. And it is going to stunt our children. And when you hear some of the other quotes, they truly are thinking of our children as little machines, little robots, that they will all be the same. And then we have the national tests that are tied to the Common Core standards. Common Core is preparing the states for a national assessment which students can only do well on if they have the Common Core curriculum. It's called high-stakes testing. Teachers' salaries depend on how well the students do on the test. And I'm sure you've heard that because of this, there's a lot of cheating going on. Teachers across the nation, they're worried about their salaries, and it's a temptation, but often they give into it and they actually fudge a little on the children's test scores. The future of the schools also is dependent on how well students do on the tests. 3 bad years and the school is taken over by a private corporation and becomes a charter school. And I used to think the charter schools were good. But then I found out more about this. The charter school no longer comes under the auspices of the school board. It is now under this private corporation, like Bill Gates. And if the parents don't like what is going on, who do they go to? It is truly, as this next quote shows, education without representation. And these are 3 darling mothers that I met in Heber City, Utah. They've started their own website, and they call themselves 3 Moms Against Common Core. Crystal Lane Swayze, Renee Brady, and Elisa Ellis. And Crystal was an English major, classical English teacher, taught in a junior college as well as high school. Renee taught in elementary school, and Elisa is the mother of 7 children. That's her part of all of this. And so they really are, and all of them are moms, and they are so concerned about this that they've started their own blog, and they have amazing information. And so it's education without representation if the school has now been taken over and becomes a charter school. But it's also, if your own state elected legislators never had a vote about this, how can Common Core be by representation, and how can it be called a state initiative? When public schools are forced to become privately run charter schools, then they no longer have representation either. Then the most amazing things also are how teachers are being forced to use Common Core standards at peril of their jobs. And these standards have never really been tested. Some of them are still in the writing stage. The math and the English literature are now out there, and they're being used. But the teachers do not like this. I've been told by several teachers in California that if they go back to their old files, their job is in jeopardy. They have to give up everything that they've done in the past and be willing to go along with this new Common Core standards. And this is a reaction of some of the teachers. This is by Diane Ravitch, who is a professor of education at New York University. She says a maelstrom of pent-up resentment over being forced to do what's wrong for kids and being afraid of losing gainful employment by speaking out. That's the reaction of the teachers. And yet they don't dare really speak out because their job is in jeopardy. So who else is behind all of this? We have the stimulus money, but we also have much money coming from special interest groups, such as Bill Gates, who gave $100 million towards Common Core. And we have the largest education publishing company, Pearson Foundation, that is the biggest publisher of ebooks. They have formed a partnership. Isn't that amazing? And they are now planning to, of course, have lots and lots of money coming back. Bill Gates, you think, well, that sweet, generous soul gave $100 to Common Core. Guess what he's going to get back? Because his Microsoft computers are going to be used in the classrooms. And so the estimate is that the e-learning market in the United States is expected to grow to $6.8 billion by 2015, up from $2.9 billion from 2010. And as I told you, most of the learning now is going to be on computers, and the teachers are going to be facilitators. If the teachers don't like what they see the children are learning on this e-book, what can they do about it? It's already there. The test is there at the end of the chapter. Maybe the teacher can say, I really don't like what you're being taught. I don't agree with this at all, but there's probably a little spy in the classroom, or it'll get back to someone. So the teachers are really either going to have to go along with this or give up teaching. That's exactly the system that Nazi Germany was under. And that's what is so scary. So who really wrote this? The states, if you go to their various state websites, they'll say that Common Core was influenced by their state educators. That's not really true. This was a huge national cartel. It consisted of members of the CCSSO, which stands for Council of Chief State School Officers, the NGA, National Governors Association, and a Chief Education Policy Group, part of the NGA. These groups were joined by members of the Obama administration and a progressive group called Achieve, the teachers' labor unions, FDA, NEA, and ACT, and the College Board. So the SAT and the ACT and the College Board are all on line with this as well. And of course, they had the influence of this left-leaning Linda Darling Hammond. Have any of you ever heard of her? She was actually in line to become the Secretary of Education, but even the Democrats were speaking out against her because she was so radically left. And she was a Stanford education professor, author of many far-left progressive education books. And what's so interesting, she actually, with the help of Stanford, started a little charter school there at Stanford, along with another one that was already functioning, and they kind of worked together for a while. But her policies and ideas were so radical, this other group just kind of left her on her own. After 2 years, her program was totally a failure, and they stopped it. So she was finally putting into practice everything she had taught in her progressive education books, and it did not work. And yet she is now behind the scenes helping to write all this curriculum. And she was his advisor for when he was running for office, and she was the chief writer for Common Core and Race to the Top assessments. She is essentially the leader for the Smarter Balanced Assessment Consortium, one of the two groups that are writing the test. So in 2014, this assessment test will be coming down for the students to have their big test. The preparation is now going on. They're being taught with the curriculum to prepare for this test. And I'm sure this test is probably so radical and politically correct and leftist if this lady had something to do with it. And as I mentioned, the SAT, the ACT, and the GED, that's the test homeschoolers take to get their high school equivalent, will all be aligned to the Common Core standards. David Coleman, who became the chief architect, or he was one of the chief architects of the CCSS, took over, that stands for Common Core State Standards. He took over as the College Board president just a few days ago, October 15th. He stated that he plans to rework the SAT and the ACT to align them with the Common Core state standards. Pearson, the foremost publishing company of ebooks for the Common Core standards, has formed a partnership with the American Council on Education, and together they will be aligning the GED to the Common Core standards. So how is that going to affect homeschoolers? Homeschooled students have been some of the top scholars taking the GED, the SAT, and the ACT college entrance test because they were so well prepared and taught at home. Well, now these tests will be totally dumbed down to go along with the Common Core standards, and for a homeschooled child to be able to do well on them, he's going to have to be taught that same Common Core curriculum. Maybe his parents can say, this is what you have to write on the test, but you're not really to believe this. Who knows? But, it's just so all-pervasive now how they're coming in, affecting every child's life. And this is how Common Core is creeping into the homeschool curriculum. This is Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. They're backers and promoters of Common Core. As I mentioned, he gave $100 million, and he also gave much money, I couldn't get the exact amount, to the International Benchmark Group, a UN NGO, to promote Common Core worldwide. And this picture of him, he's just been honored for being such a great, wonderful man and giving so many billions. And as you see, he's trying to look humble, and his wife is smiling upon him. But he has an alternative reason for doing that. And now you see this logo for the Pearson Group. They're advertising on a conference to train the teachers. Together, the Bill Gates Foundation and the Pearson Foundation will be doing the training for the teachers, how to implement Common Core curriculum. Excuse me a moment. And as you see, Pearson is the world's leading learning company. They've given themselves that title. They have essentially taken over every bookstore publishing company. This is a monopoly. My first book was published by a company called Ex Libris, and this is my book that took 3 years and 20 years of research. It's called By Stealth and Deception, USA Transformation, and it's parallel to the European Union. And I have essentially a 100-year history of what's been going on behind the scenes in the United States. A lot of it is preparing for Agenda 21, and so much that's happening now. The company that put this first out was called Ex Libris. Ex Libris has been taken over by Pearson. So I am not using them anymore. I have formed my own publishing company. And all of my books are coming from me now. They have also taken over 100 other books, the education books, but they let everyone keep their own name, so you don't really know that. They, for example, Penguin is now publishing for the Ex Libris. Penguin is taken over by Pearson, but they let Penguin keep their name. And they have Scott Foreman, Prentice Hall, Allen and Bacon, Addison Wesley, Silver, Burdett, and Ginn, Longman, Benjamin Cummings, and Macmillan Publishing, just some of the top education publishers. They've all been taken over by Pearson. So you can imagine the slanted publishing that's going to go on in all of these education books. And during the years, Pearson has also branched out to companies abroad with interests in 70 countries and 36,000 employees in all of these various countries. So that's how Common Core is being pushed globally. It's mainly through Pearson and Bill Gates and, of course, other people, which I will show you. This is one of the most amazing of those. His name is Sir Michael Barber, and he works for Pearson. Isn't that amazing? He's their chief education advisor. Barber was knighted by Queen Elizabeth for his education reform. That shows that Queen Elizabeth is kind of on the same page with what's going on. He wrote a book called Deliverology 101, and it was to tell how to implement all this new education reform. And what he says in it is, no longer are we to be managed by individuals or sovereign countries. We are no longer to have frontiers and no more barriers. Of course, he's totally on page with Agenda 21 and top-down world government. And to him, Common Core equals world education, global education. This is a copy of his book. And when he was speaking about it, he gave a formula for revolution. This was in August 2012 at a British Education Summit, and he shows his formula. So first of all, he has systemic innovation plus sameness of standards plus structure plus human capital. And what does that equal? Whole system revolution. Isn't that wonderful? And when you read those words, I don't want my child to be part of a systemic innovation, sameness of standards, sameness of structure, referred to as human capital. Doesn't it sound like they're just little robots that they're trying to be producing? And then we will have a whole system revolution. So who is promoting Sir Barber and his globalist Common Core? This amazing group called the Council on Foreign Relations. How many of you have heard of them? I think we're in the right place. If all of you listen to Dr. Stan, you know about them and you know about all the other secret societies behind the scenes. Well, anyone that's invited to speak before the CFR usually is on the same page as they are. And when he was asked to speak for them, and notice they now have a council of councils. And this is how they are planning to influence other people around the globe. The Council on Foreign Relations used to be just kind of strictly for the United States, but they are now spreading their influences as well. When he spoke for them, he praised Common Core, calling it internationally benchmarked, and praised the Council on Foreign Relations for their support of it. And he said, can I congratulate the CFR for getting into this issue? I think it's great to see education as an issue of national security and foreign policy as well as economic and domestic policy. So he was very proud of the CFR. And then, of course, we have public-private partnerships, and this is definitely from the Agenda 21 website and pages and their global plan. And as you've heard from Michael Shaw, when you have public-private partnerships, it used to be that you had businesses that were kind of helping to curb the power of government. They would have a kind of a balance and a check on the power of big government. What happens when businesses are now in partnership with government? That check and balance is gone. And that's what is happening with both the Gates and Pearson Foundation. They are forming partnerships around the globe. They formed a partnership to produce online curriculum for the Common Core standards, and they also are providing the training, as was mentioned, and then they're going around investing in schools that are not doing so well. So if a school that has failed for 3 years, getting their test scores up, mainly because the tests are kind of rigged, then that school is taken over by a private enterprise, such as the foundation that these two men have started. And that's what they're doing in other countries. They buy cheap schools in developing countries in partnership with government and then run the schools using Pearson e-books, Gates computers, and government funding. So they still have the people's tax-paying dollars coming in just like our charter schools do. Even though the parents don't have anything to say if they don't like what's going on because there's not a school board they can go to, they still have to pay taxes for those charter schools. So they're not totally taken over by these private enterprises. It's a partnership. And now I'm going to give you hope. There are actually some prominent people that are speaking out against Common Core. You may not agree with Mitt Romney on a lot of things, but I was amazed to find out, first of all, he even knew about Common Core, and he made these bold statements against it. He said, I don't subscribe to the idea of the federal government trying to push a Common Core on various states. There may be a time when the government has an agenda that it wants to promote. And I'm not wild about the federal government having some kind of agenda that it then compensates states to teach their kids. I'd rather let education and what is taught state by state be determined state by state and by the federal, not by the federal government. So I thought that was really wonderful, and I wish that somewhere in the debates education had come up. Maybe he would have made this statement. I did notice at the last debate that Obama said, you know, one of the good things I've done, I've gotten 46 states to sign on to my new education program. But he didn't say what it was. He didn't mention it as Common Core, and it was just kind of very fleeting. And unless you knew about this, you would not have even caught it. And other prominent voices are speaking out. Even though Nikki Haley's state adopted the Common Core standard, she's trying to get South Carolina out. And she supported a bill that was going through the state legislature to try to get them to drop this. She said, challenges in education cannot be solved by increasing our dependence on federal dollars and the mandates that come with them. The Virginia State Board of Education never allowed Common Core to be adopted in their state. And they said it does not meet the high standards Virginia already has, and it's cost prohibitive. They took enough time to really research it. They didn't jump on the bandwagon in those 2 months. Governor Rick Perry of Texas, another state that refused it, he wrote to Arne Duncan and said, "I will not commit Texas taxpayers to unfunded federal obligations or to the adoption of unproven, cost-prohibitive national standards and tests. It would be foolish and irresponsible to place our children's future in the hands of unelected bureaucrats and special interest groups thousands of miles away in Washington." So you have to commend Rick Perry as well. And there is still hope. We have various groups fighting this in the state of Utah. They have a coalition of about 20 different groups that have united. They call themselves Utahns Against Common Core. They've made remarkable progress and success in Utah. The state board voted in August to no longer be part of the consortia working on the assessment, and they will not allow the assessment test to come into their state. Is that exciting? And then they got rid of their pro-Common Core state superintendent. He resigned. Then I wanted to tell you about this amazing strike in Chicago. All that we heard on television was that they were striking because they wanted a higher salary, and they were already some of the highest paying teachers in the nation, so we thought those greedy teachers. But I actually went on to a website. It was done by a liberal journalist. Her name is Amy Goodman. And so she was interviewing some of these teachers and finding out the truth. They said they had to say that they wanted higher salaries because that was the only grounds upon which Illinois would let them strike. But they said the real reason they were striking was they didn't want Arne Duncan's plan, because he'd already tried it in Chicago and it was a failed policy there, and now it was being imposed on the nation. This was the Common Core standards as well as race to the top. And I thought that was quite remarkable. And then I heard some of them, for example, a math teacher was saying, it was a science teacher, that the school had just started, it had been going on for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. He already had to give his students a very difficult test about DNA that, of course, not a single student passed. And then that test is used to grade him as a teacher and grade the school. And he said this is unfair, and it's high stakes testing, and it's almost like it's geared so the students will fail. And of course, we don't hear anything about that either. And he mentioned that he thought the whole purpose for this was to bring the school's test scores so low, it'll bring the teachers' salaries low, but it will also make it so the school has to be taken over by a private enterprise. Isn't that amazing? So I thought this was a lot of truth coming out. First of all, a liberal journalist was interviewing liberal teachers that all belong to a liberal union in Chicago, but truth was coming out there that the rest of us just didn't hear. And they were all speaking out against Arne Duncan and his failed policies in Chicago, and even the Chicago newspaper wrote about Arne Duncan and said how bad his policies were. Have I run out of time? Oh, not quite. Okay. And there are other states that are fighting Common Core. There's several bills that have actually been passed. One is in Indiana, one is in Kansas, and South Dakota. And these either a resolution or a bill that we're asking for a closer look at Common Core, either because of the costs. 4 other states have required a formal review of the curriculum of cost analysis. This is California, Iowa, Maryland, and New Mexico. And I was amazed to think California was actually asking for a review. But it's probably because we don't have any money, and to be stuck with $1.6 billion to have to pay for this. Other states did have bills going through, but they didn't pass, but they can certainly bring them up again. This was Alaska, Alabama, Georgia, Missouri, South Carolina, Oklahoma, and Washington. But Alaska has already said no to it, so I'm confused about that one. Maybe some people are still trying to get Alaska to join on, and so they were coming up with a bill to stop it. In total, 26 out of the 46 states that had originally accepted Common Core are not happy with it. So maybe in the new legislative session we might even see more success if more and more of their citizens wake up to this and speak out about it. So what can we do to fight this? We need to become informed, take action. I would suggest you read my book. I do have a special deal for you. If you buy 2 of them, it's $25. If you buy 1, it's $15. And I'm hoping that people will take an extra book to give to a school board member or to a teacher and let them know what's really going on behind the scenes in all of this. But you could also download evidence from suggested websites, and the yellow form that was passed out to you has some wonderful websites like the Utahns Against Common Core, the 3 Moms Against Common Core. Print copies and send downloads to others. You need to counter misleading information that promotes Common Core state standards and related issues. Let them know that these standards are not higher. In fact, where they've been tested, they are lower. And the fact that it is imposing such controls over our teachers. Call, write, and meet with elected local, state, and national representatives. This would be a really good time to do this now during the election. Say, I'm thinking about voting for you, but I want to know what you know about Common Core state standards before you have my vote. And if they don't know anything about it, they're maybe going to start investigating and finding out how bad this is. I did this for our people who are running for school board in Santa Rosa. One had never heard of it at all. One lady said, this is like a freight train, there's no stopping it. And I said, you know, people have said that before, but things have been stopped by people waking up to find out what's going on. Phyllis Schlafly, that's how Eagle Forum got started. She took on the Equal Rights Amendment that was also told it was a freight train going through. Both parties in Congress had passed it. All it needed now was the ratification of the states, 2/3 of the states, and it would have been part of our Constitution. Because she began to speak out about it and lead this battle, they could never get the last 3 states. And 5 states that heard her speak rescinded on their ratification. Otherwise, our Constitution would be vastly different if that had become part of it. If the Equal Rights Amendment were part of our Constitution, she discovered so many deceptive things about this that would have radically changed our lives. So that's another example of a freight train going rapidly that was able to be changed just because of wonderful people like you finding out the truth and speaking out about it. And you can start, speak out on talk radio. You can start a letter writing campaign with others of like mind. Actually I have that twice, I guess it meant so much to me. Establish a group to speak at events and on the radio. If you can get nothing printed in your local newspaper, then be your own newspaper. Hand out flyers to your neighbors and ask them to join your efforts in stopping Common Core. This is how Rosa Corey started her battle in Santa Rosa. We were fighting our rural property rights at the same time she was fighting the downtown area of Santa Rosa where they were trying to have a redevelopment district coming in, and she was making no headway speaking to the city council. So she started her own little flyers, handing her own newspapers, and she and others with her would hand these out every day, and they got people so excited about it that they held it off for 3 years. It took 2 lawsuits as well, or it took a lawsuit that then went to a higher court, and even though they didn't win, because California didn't have any more money, they didn't put it through, and the redevelopment districts were essentially then changed. But that shows what one person can do just with motivation and being your own little newspaper. So if you can't get anything printed in your local paper, just start doing flyers. That's how some people have fought the smart meter battle as well. Oh, and by the way, that's the other book that I was trying to figure out what was going on and wrote a book about the smart meters. This was published last June and essentially tells the battle that we've been fighting in Santa Rosa as well as throughout Northern California, and now Southern California has joined on. And I first heard about it from Deborah Taveras, who spoke in my home, and I was so intrigued by what she told us that I started researching. So, and if you can't get the truth out any other way, write a book. It's kind of fun. Okay, and just in conclusion, this is the name of my publishing company. It's called the Small Helm Press, and it's based on the scripture in James that says, James chapter 3, verse 4, "Behold also the ships, which though they be so great, and are driven of fierce winds, yet are they turned about with a very small helm." Even though it looks like we have a huge ship ahead of us, there's no way of turning it. That one person, that very small helm, speaking out bravely can make a difference. And that's what my other quote is. Just as a very small helm can turn about a great ship, it only takes one person armed with truth and courage and willing to speak out who can sometimes change the course of history. And I hope each one of you will be that person. Thank you.